Hey, Pat Moran with Health Your Money. Really excited to have another podcast today and to be with our guest, Angela Olea. So from Assisted Living Locators. Did I pronounce the last name correct?
Olea.
Olea, okay. I just said Olea. So Angela has a very neat company and profession that will affect people in their lives more so than they'll ever know. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But as I get started, coronavirus. It's on everybody's mind. It's out there. What are you seeing in the, especially in the assisted living community and with what you're doing day to day with, that's a real large part of the populace that's directly affected by the disease more so than maybe younger people. So are you getting calls? Are you getting people that are nervous about that or worried about their loved ones? How are you handling all that issue?
It is something that's coming up for the assisted living locators for our franchisees across the U.S. It's already hit in Washington and a long-term care rehabilitation center. To my knowledge, that's the only center that it's hit. But one of the things that we've educated on and worked with the different communities is awareness of bringing visitors into the community and making sure that that we're bringing people in that have making sure that they don't have any signs, symptoms, and that they're feeling healthy, and also sharing with the other communities that a few of the communities have already implemented making sure you follow these processes when you come into the building. So we've shared that with others. So right now it's just preventative for bringing in guests, but fortunately the exposure right now for our families, many of the elderly are living in their own home. And so they don't have the high exposures of a lot of travel and things like that.
Are you getting phone calls from people that have said, my dad or mom's got the flu. Oh my goodness, we need to get them some type of care. Any of your franchise seeing that, or is it? My fear is that I'm not trying to downplay the severity of this illness, but I also know that sometimes these things take on a path all of their own,
right?
Or
a
maybe
panic.
Not this big, then.
No, and typically that's not the call that we get anyway. The call that we get is if somebody an elderly has had a fall, they've had a stroke, they've had a debilitating, something has happened that has prevented them from receiving care. Otherwise, if it's just an acute illness or a short-term illness, they're going to go, they're going to follow a path of doctor, hospital, and then rehabilitation if that's the case.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What do you do and how do you do it?
All right, so assisted living locators, what we do is we are matchmakers. We're like the eHarmony of senior care. So we have a process. We work with families and identify. We do go through a discovery when their loved one is no longer safely able to live independently in their situation, and we get the phone call or get a referral, meet with the family, and discover what is the issue, what are their needs. And then we explore all of the options from location, their finances, the health of the individual, the age of the individual, support system, what is their social situation, and we begin developing a plan for the family. And then if it involves going to senior living communities, much like a realtor, we handhold and go with them and go evaluate the properties that match their needs. And then we help facilitate a seamless transition for move-in, following up with the families to see how is this working out. Is it meeting your needs, expected and unexpected? Is mom starting to thrive, walking them through the different steps in the process, and then continuing to follow up with the families for years after to ensure how are things going. Situations change, loved ones pass, so there might be other moves involved, or they really endorsed that was a great situation and maybe it expanded their life by many years.
Sounds expensive.
The cost of care is continuously going up. Average cost of care is about $4,000 a month for assisted living, and memory care can be significantly more than that. And the most expensive type of care, hard to believe, is getting care in your home.
Wow.
In-home care, the 24-hour care is going to run anywhere in $22,000 to $25,000, and even higher in certain parts of the country. So.
And then, how does your firm charge for its fees?
Great question. Our services are free to the families.
Wow.
So the consultation and all of the follow-up and the services, we are paid by the providers in our network, our vetted providers.
That's great. Angela, if I could give you $1 for every time I was in meetings or with people that said, but I do have long-term care. I have Medicare.
Right.
And you know that people say that.
That is such a common misconception that we're faced with, and it's often the most difficult conversation when we begin exploring. This is the generation that we're working with really didn't share their finances with their adult children. It was a very private situation. So oftentimes, until the adult child is going through the process,
right,
that's their first awareness of what is the cost of care, and they would choose to have their loved one at home with the care services until they hear the cost and that Medicare is not going to pay for that.
Right.
And it is a sticker shock, and I've been through that thousands of times.
Oh, I can imagine. Can you so talk a little bit about that? What does Medicare do? I mean, how much does it really cover? And we, people, one of the things that we really try to pride ourselves on in our practice is really trying to blow the cover off of many misconceptions that people have, or preconceived notions. Let's talk about Medicare. What does it really do? What can you expect?
So Medicare is, as I mentioned, if someone goes into the hospital and the days before going into the hospital, so it'll cover doctor visits, physical therapy visits, if it's related to an injury. It is triggered when someone goes into the hospital.
Okay.
And there's a minimum number of days that a senior has to stay in the hospital for Medicare to cover beyond that in a skilled nursing.
Okay.
And so it's an acute care is in the hospital, and it's subacute when they go into the rehabilitation. So after someone has been in the hospital for a certain number of days, and again, they have to meet that, then if they still have skilled needs, such as they've got wound care, they've got swallowing difficulties for occupational therapy, if they have physical needs that meet the requirements, then they can go to a subacute or a skilled nursing, and it will cover the first, depending on your insurance, it will cover if you have a Medicare Advantage plan versus if you have straight Medicare. And there are a certain number of days that are covered of 100%.
Okay.
And if you have the typical Medicare, and after those days, usually it's the 20 days, 21 days.
Wow.
And then your secondary, if you don't have a secondary, then you're picking those costs up. And so
it's only about 100 days, really. I mean, I know every situation
maximum of 100 days, but if you're typical, and if someone, what we've also seen is if someone is in the hospital, but they weren't admitted, they might have looked like they were in a hospital room, but there's an observation place that they're admitted within the hospital. And what was happening in certain circumstances, they were saying 2 days officially as a patient, and then going to the rehabilitation, and the entire rehabilitation was not covered under that state because it didn't meet. And so there's really an education process on all different aspects. And so it is something that families, it can hit, it's a financial crisis. It can be a huge amount of money.
Well, and the time to be dealing with this is now. Everybody, a lot of people try to deal with this after it's happened, so it becomes all reactive, which only creates more chaos, family shuffling, figuring out the finances. Arizona has, the long-term care partnership,
Right.
which requires very aggressive spend down of assets, and you feel bad for the spouse that needs the care, but the surviving spouse, wow, they can become impoverished. And I'm sure you've seen this. Tell us some stories.
One of the things, and that we've seen, we've got 130 offices across the U.S.
Okay.
and is you mentioned Arizona is one of the states that does have a program that will help pay for long-term care and an assisted living.
Okay.
Many states have no program, and it doesn't cover any type of assisted living.
Wow.
It'll cover nursing home care.
Right.
But when you talk about the VA, one of the things that have been devastating is if the veteran themselves have passed and the healthy spouse is now the surviving spouse, and they have depleted their entire funds caring for their spouse, and then to hear now they're starting to need care and they've depleted their funds, and then to learn that their spouse was a veteran, so they could have qualified for this, and at that point they would have been a perfect candidate. A married couple would have been a perfect candidate for applying for the Medicaid program,
Right.
so that the funds would have been allocated for the healthy spouse and for the one that required the care. But to spend down for the healthy spouse to spend down all of their funds and now be depleted and have nothing left to care for themselves.
Isn't that a shame?
And you don't even want to say anything about
And
what they could have had.
I'm not totally up to date, but I remember it used to be you could have like $60,000 of equity in your home, an automobile that was $10,000 or less, and like a couple thousand in cash. I mean, the required spend down is crazy.
Right. And even with the spend down, we get a call for people don't know that oftentimes they now have to share a bedroom. They have to share an apartment with
good
someone
point.
else. So Medicaid does not always cover having your own private apartment or private room.
Right.
And so that can be a really big shock to someone who's lived in their own home or lived independently and not had that to consider, or family will have to supplement if it's not available as an option at that particular property. And that's, so it definitely is a shock for the individual.
I had a family that actually the best they could do was put their parent, a couple hours away. The system the facility that was open wasn't in their backyard. It was, this is what's open, take it or leave it. And my fear is that it's only going to become, even much bigger than what we've seen with the amount of baby boomers that are transitioning right now into retirement and how we're living longer, that if you don't have planning, the choices that you may be forced with accepting aren't going to be to your liking. I always say there's this line that you control and this line that they control. Which line would you rather be in?
And that is, the planning part is really important. And for us, for our advisors when working with a family, we know which properties that if you're in the best property, it might be 2 years that you have to, 2 or 3 years of private pay.
Right.
And then if your funds have depleted, you're at least in the right spot. And then they do have Medicaid beds, but only for the individuals who've spent down at their community. And so for those that are coming already depleted without the funds, the inventory and the selection is very much depleted, and families are it's a tough conversation, and it's a challenge working with the families to find that match and that satisfaction. And when someone's got long-term care or if they fund it properly, those are the amount of options that we have, especially in Arizona, is tremendous.
Well, and I would imagine that, frankly, care facilities and nursing groups, things like that, would like to see that, and
Right.
We're going to, frankly, roll out the red carpet to do the best they can for those people, because there are money and resources available to pay for it. And if you don't, then you really are at the, I guess, from what you're saying, at the whims of the system.
Yes, no, that would be accurate.
So you touched on something that I think is really important. Someone needs long-term care. What are you seeing with families having to get involved in this whole process and the amount of reshuffling that's taking place in their lives? I read where family care to loved ones, if it was an industry, would like be the third biggest industry in the United States right now, being hundreds of billions of dollars of money spent on doing this. I'm sure you're seeing that.
It is. It's a crisis that I've seen. I saw it over 10 years ago. I was preaching about the crisis that was coming for the putting together employee assistance programs,
Okay.
telling the employers to be alert, to get these plans, to be proactive for their elderly parents.
Okay.
And it is in crisis mode with the amount of time off that people are taking. If they're physically there and they've got an aging loved one that's at a distance, and they call and their loved one's not answering, did they fall? Is mom taking her medications appropriately? Did they make their doctor's appointment? They're driving, but they shouldn't be. And so mentally, it is taking its toll, even if physically they're in the office. But we're seeing a reduction in the number of hours, the more time off that they're having to take to care for their aging parents. And there's a shift that I'm seeing as well, that there's jobs are not as forgiving when you have to keep putting out fires. And a lot of times the adult parents are at least 200 miles away from the parents, and the adult children are 200 plus miles away. And so there's a shift that can happen where the adult child can potentially lose their job because of the caregiving. And then they're shifting sometimes the care. They're telling mom or dad, you need to move to me. I can't do this at a distance. And so the great thing with our medication and technology and tools, people are living longer and longer.
Right.
But the bad part is that we didn't plan. Many people did not plan properly to accommodate the type of care that the aging process was going to take.
I have a very good client that she lives in Sun City, and her immediate family lives up in Washington, and they've told her, Mom, you need to move home so we can give you care, and you're here and we can help you out. And she's like, but my whole life's here.
Right.
And you're asking me to make a major sacrifice, but they're saying, Mom, if you're not here, we can't, there's not a lot we can do to help you, and what it does to our lives and flying around. So, gosh, I'm sure that's got to be commonplace.
That is nine times out of 10. That's what the adult children are faced with, is the brakes. The parents really pumping the brakes on maintaining what independence that they have, and the fear away from moving from what they're familiar with. And what we see is, when there is a shift, when they get that supportive care, whether it's in assisted living or whether it's home with some support services in place, the thriving of that social lubrication and that longevity that comes, but it's a healthy longevity, and it's a revitalization. So that fear is often unfounded, and once they transition, they find that it's a huge relief not having to worry about, if they're going to slip and fall, and no one's going to be there to check on them, that they won't even know, because they may not have any interaction with someone for 24, 48 hours.
Right. I think a lot of people think it's never going to happen to them.
Yes.
And I'm sure those are many of the stories that your franchisees are saying, is it just caught the family totally off guard. They had no plan in place, and just look at the chaos it's created. You're hearing a lot of those stories probably.
Yes, and what they do see is they see little warning signs, and they are reactive to that. It alerts, and we may get the first phone call, and then it's a pump the brakes because no, mom or dad is fine. They just got, something happened with the car or they got their medications, but we're putting this step in place. And it's prolonging and prolonging, and then when it's a crisis, and oftentimes on that phone call they need to make a move, and it needs to happen because there's an accident, there's a major pain or trigger that there is no choice, that the doctor has said your mom is not safe, your mom or dad is unsafe to be home without care 24 hours.
There really needs to be better education. It's funny, we insure our home, we insure our car. I mean, our house has like a 1 in 1,000 chance, of burning down or, getting in a major accident or our property and stuff. But yet I saw where 70% of people over 70 run the risk of needing some type of long-term care or assisted living. But yet we do the car or the house and all these different things and push that to the wayside.
Yeah, thousands and thousands of families that we work with, and it's an anomaly when we get someone who's properly insured to pay for it. It is the exception to the rule, and it's something that you hear and we share. Oh my gosh, and now we're seeing some newer policies that are built on insurance, which is wonderful, but we're seeing sporadically the old long-term care insurance that are just that, and when we get those, I mean, it's thrilling because the family it's a lot easier for the family to make a decision when it's not based on how much am I going to have to contribute.
Exactly. Great
and
point.
We are having more and more families that are having to pitch in because mom or dad absolutely are not going to meet the threshold for being in. There are going to be options, but not the type of options that they would feel comfortable for their loved one.
We just went this, God rest her soul, with my mother-in-law, who suffered a brain aneurysm in October, and it was a long, drawn-out process, and she passed away. And we had what we thought great planning in place, and we still got bills over $80,000. Wow. And she had to go to one of these hospitals locally because the ambulance company was obligated, the fire department, to take her to the nearest facility. And I remember just doing a 6-mile life flight to Barrows Neurological Institute here in Arizona, which is world famous. It was about $30,000. And I was sitting there thinking, how do people pay for this? Why aren't people making this more of a priority? And I'm afraid, Angela, that the coronavirus, as scared as we are now, long-term care and what we're going to see with that moving forward is going to make the coronavirus look like, a pimple on your arm. It's going to be explosive. Do you think that also?
Oh, I think we've only seen the tip of the iceberg of what type of what kind of pressure it's going to place on families, on the states to help step in where there's a huge shortfall. And it is definitely that it's at crisis mode right now because very few families. You've got a big discrepancy. You've got those who have, and you've got a huge population of those who have not.
Right.
And that is increasing, the number of those that haven't. But for those who have, it again, the choices that are out there are just amazing.
Sure.
What the senior living communities and the amenities and the benefits that they're providing.
Right.
And so it is definitely education and getting out there. And it's a good time for us when we talk with the adult children. Sometimes it's often too late. It is too late. By the time there's a crisis for the elderly parents, if they have failed to plan properly, at that point it's too late for implementing any insurances or what have you. We look for all different kinds of ways to help pay for that. But for the adult child, it is an opportunity, and oftentimes that's the trigger for them to say, oh my gosh, I cannot go through this. I don't want my children going through this. I need to do something. And seeing.
I couldn't agree with you more. people have got to start taking action. And I have seen, being in this business for 34 years, I have seen the financial consequences of not planning, but I've also heard and seen the stories of planning and having the proper things in place, what a huge difference it can make for the families. So talk to me a little bit about, as we wrap up here, how does your process work? I need help. What's the best way to get started and doing things with your company?
So Assisted Living Locators, like I said, we've got 130 franchises and we're in 35 states, and the process, we work together. So if we have an advisor in one state and mom's in a different state, we coordinate care.
Okay.
And it's finding us on the internet, and we've got an assessment tool that will tell them, here's some options. This is what you need to consider. Mm-hmm. We have a live, if they call, or oftentimes if they go to their healthcare professionals, they will refer to us as well. And so it starts off with a phone call and just finding out during that discovery, and we'll be able to quickly assess those needs and provide next steps and provide options and help look at what they're currently at for, do they have resources to pay for it through all different types of means, from veterans to reverse mortgage to life insurance to do they have family that can contribute pension?
There's a wealth of options. You're right, out there.
And that's such an important part. Is there a long-term care insurance policy? And make that phone call and do that discovery on that. And that's probably one of the biggest things, because without that, it's hard to match make with a proper option and really get those. So it's a phone call. We talk with them and help provide those options, and simple phone call.
Okay. So what would you advise people to do to maybe get some preparations and things in place now?
Meet with a financial advisor and talk with their insurance about what are the costs depending on their age. What is, really looking at what is the cost of care, because we see it go up 3 to 6% per year.
Wow.
And just being prepared for that and how they're doing their planning.
Right. So, in Health Your Money, one of the things that we really do is we educate people and make them aware of the different options that are out there. And just like you touched upon, there are a lot of great planning tools and solutions that are available. People just have to take a second to learn about them, ask, and we as financial planning professionals need to have that conversation too. I know it can be an unpleasant conversation, but imagine that I'm talking to you, your mom just went into assisted living care, and I'm talking to you about liquidating your, $400,000 that you had in your 401k that you saved your whole life, that you now have to use to pay for the care of your mother, when we could have easily tackled this with, some simple solutions. And, I hear bad things per se about traditional long-term care. It's expensive. I may or may not use it. The policies are always changing, blah, 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 blah. But there's such a movement now to so many other solutions other than that. And I think it's refreshing to hear you say that the conversation and the planning starts now. And does your company help with some of that? Do you...
We have partners in different states that, for financial advisors, it's certainly something that, and again, with the adult children, that's a conversation. Do they have someone? Where do you go?
Right.
But we do get referrals from financial advisors because people have plans. Some have planned. Like you said, oftentimes it's to liquidate, and it's that not so pleasant conversation.
Sure.
But yeah, it's the referral to strategic partners, knowing who are resources in your different area.
Client that we worked with when he was 40 to get a policy in place so that, if he was young, it was inexpensive. So now, as he's, approaching his 60s, he says, I'm so happy that I'm not dealing with that now, based on where costs could be now. And we are living longer.
Right.
So with that technology becomes potential risk of keeping you alive, to keep you alive. Maybe not the quality of life that you want, but it can be very expensive in dealing with this. So again, anything you want to add as we wrap up here?
Just be aware, get that contingency plan in place, and it's better to have it and not need it than need it, not have it.
Okay, good
So,
point. Good point. Well, I can't thank you enough for what you're doing. I think
you.
that people need to be doing this and need to be thinking about this now, especially with your loved ones. If you're young, get out in front of this.
Yes.
Don't be reactive, be proactive. And your company sounds like it's really committed to helping people and making a difference so that long-term care and assisted living doesn't wipe out family resources and time and create all these problems that unfortunately you and I have seen way too often.
Yep, start the conversation now.
So again, what's your website?
AssistedLivingLocators.com.
Okay, and maybe a best phone number to get in contact with you?
480-807-HELP, H-E-L-P.
And why don't you share your email? I know we'll have the links below here in our presentation. Okay. All right. So lastly, this has been Pat Moran with Healthier Money and with Angela from Assisted Living Locators. You need to be dealing with this now. Let's have that conversation of what's available to you and take a look at the options that you can get out in front of this so that it's not being a financial disaster by being on the back end of this. Thanks for listening today.